He slammed his badge on the table, his voice shaking with rage. I won't bow to someone who only got here because of her skin. And across from him, Commander Naomi Wallace didn't flinch. I wasn't given this rank, I earned it. You, on the other hand, dug your own grave the minute you opened your mouth. In that moment, the silence was louder than 1,000 sirens. A career built on arrogance was brought to its knees, not by revenge, but by truth. And the woman they once humiliated at the gates had just rewritten the rules. This isn't just a story about one woman's courage. It's about what happens when the past refuses to stay buried, and dignity becomes the weapon they never saw coming. If this story moved you, please like, leave a comment, subscribe, and tap the bell. Because the stories that matter most, they're the ones we carry with us long after the headlines fade. Now let's begin. It was just past 6:45 a.m. when Naomi Wallace eased her black Ford Explorer into the back lot of the Brookfield Police Department. The summer morning air was thick with humidity, and the early sun cast long, amber shadows across the pavement. She parked in a corner space reserved for command staff, cut the engine, and sat still for a moment, watching. Naomi, at 54, carried the quiet authority of someone who had walked through fire more than once and never needed to raise her voice to be heard. A former U.S. Army intelligence officer turned law enforcement specialist, she had led teams through war zones, rebuilt compromised agencies overseas, and trained federal task forces. But today, for the first time in a long time, she didn't wear a uniform. No brass, no stars, just gray slacks, a plain navy blouse, and a small leather satchel. Deliberate. This wasn't about making a statement. It was about observing a department that had forgotten what accountability looked like. She was early for a reason. Someone from the Pentagon was set to hand off a confidential file, a transition folder with names, patterns, and flags buried deep. She wanted to receive it quietly before walking through the front doors and announcing her command. She stood alone near the staff entrance, the lot still quiet except for the hum of a nearby HVAC unit. She checked her phone, 6:49 a.m. Then the shift came, so subtle it might have gone unnoticed if she hadn't trained her whole life to feel tension before it formed. A voice snapped from behind her, "Ma'am, you need to move away from that entrance." Naomi turned slowly with calm precision. The speaker was Sergeant Cole Barnes, tall, broad, white, maybe in his early 40s, with the kind of jawline that had seen too many bar fights and not enough self-awareness. His hand hovered near his holster as he approached, squinting at her like he already had her figured out. "That's a restricted area," he said flat and firm. "We've had some issues with trespassing. I'm going to need to see some ID and hear what business you think you have standing there." Naomi didn't blink. "I'm here on official business," she said evenly, "waiting on a secure handoff. Should only take a few minutes." Barnes didn't answer right away. Instead, his eyes scanned her, clothing, shoes, skin tone, then narrowed further. "You're not staff," he muttered, just loud enough to insult. "And you sure as hell don't belong in this part of the lot." Before Naomi could respond, a second voice chimed in. "What's going on, Cole?" It was Officer Lisa Drew, a young white woman in her early 30s, ponytail tight, expression sharper than her badge. She joined him with a curious smirk. "She says she's waiting for a handoff," Barnes replied sarcastically, making air quotes. "No uniform, no clearance, no idea who she's supposed to be." Lisa folded her arms. "You with records or something? You don't just hang around staff entrances like this, sweetheart." Naomi took a deep breath, then calmly reached into her blazer and pulled out a badge holder. She held it up, not shoving, not defensive, just presenting it with the same calm that had walked her through bomb zones. Neither of them looked at it. Lisa let out a quiet laugh. "A laminated card, that's cute." "It's real," Naomi said softly. "Sure it is," Barnes snapped, stepping closer. "You've got 10 seconds to clear the premises before we detain you for trespassing. You can wait where civilians wait." Naomi didn't move. That's when the third officer arrived. Kyle Mason, young, unsure, just 26, and still learning how to hold himself in his own boots. He stopped short when he saw the standoff, coffee cup trembling slightly in his grip. "Is there a problem?" he asked, trying to gauge the temperature of the scene. "She claims she's on official business," Lisa said, shaking her head. "But she's got no badge, no clearance." Kyle looked at Naomi, then glanced quickly at the ID in her hand. His eyes lingered just a second too long. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, but stopped. Barnes snapped. Step away from the door now. Naomi finally spoke again. Calm, unshaken. Are you sure you want to escalate this? Lady, I'm not asking again. And then, out of sight, just beyond the black iron fence lining the back lot, a man walking his dog paused. He didn't yell. He didn't interrupt. He just quietly pulled out his phone and started recording, angling the camera through the bars, uncertain of what he was witnessing, but instinctively knowing it wasn't right. Naomi noticed, but she didn't flinch. She looked back at the three officers, her voice as smooth as glass. I've done nothing wrong, and in about 10 minutes that will be very, very clear. She turned toward the door, reaching for the handle. Don't you walk away from me, Barnes barked, his voice rising now, dripping with entitlement. You're refusing to follow a lawful order. Naomi stopped, turned her head slightly and looked him in the eye. I told you, I'm here for work. Lisa scoffed. Work? Doing what? Naomi didn't answer. She pushed open the door and stepped inside, letting it close softly behind her. The click of that door echoed like a gavel. Outside, the three officers stood in awkward silence. Kyle still hadn't moved. He looked down at the cup in his hand, suddenly aware of how cold it had become. And across the street, the man with the phone pressed save. He didn't know who that woman was, but something told him the whole country would soon find out. The conference room clock struck 8 a.m. sharp when the double doors swung open. The chatter inside died instantly. Naomi Wallace stepped into the room with quiet command, now dressed in full regulation uniform, pressed navy blues, brass buttons gleaming beneath the overhead lights, and the silver insignia of commanding officer shining boldly from her collar. But it wasn't the uniform that drew the room silent. It was her presence. She didn't enter like someone asking for authority. She entered like someone who already owned it. 25 officers turned to look. Conversations clipped off mid-sentence. A few instinctively straightened their posture. Sergeant Cole Barnes, seated dead center with his arms crossed, stiffened. Officer Lisa Drew, just to his right, blinked rapidly but said nothing. And in the back corner, Kyle Mason, coffee forgotten, sat rigid, his jaw tight. Naomi walked to the front of the room, carrying no folders, no clipboard, only a slim remote in one hand. She didn't ask for quiet. She didn't need to. Good morning, she began, voice calm, precise. I'm Commander Naomi Wallace. As of this morning, I've assumed leadership over the Brookfield Police Department. No one clapped, no one spoke, but the air was electric. You've all seen leadership changes before, she continued. So let me be clear. This one is different. It won't be about rearranging desks or tweaking patrol zones. This is about culture, about conduct, about who we are when we think no one's watching. She clicked the remote. Behind her, the screen on the wall flickered to life. It was a silent, black and white video, pulled directly from the department's own security system. The timestamp in the corner read 6:49 a.m. that morning. There on screen stood Naomi in the parking lot, and then, one by one, the three officers who had confronted her. Every movement was visible, every gesture, every posture. You couldn't hear what was said, but you didn't need to. It was all there in the body language. The finger pointing, the laughter, the way Barnes hovered near his holster, the way Naomi stood perfectly still. She didn't speak while the video played. No names were mentioned, no accusations made, just the footage. A few officers shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. One reached up and loosened his collar. Lisa Drew stared straight ahead, face blank. Barnes sat like stone, jaw clenched so tight you could see the muscles twitch. When the video ended, the screen went dark. Naomi let the silence breathe. Then she said simply, if this is how we greet a stranger in the back lot of our own department, I have to ask, how do we treat the public? No response, just silence that felt heavy in the chest. She didn't raise her voice, didn't call anyone out. That made it worse, for them. I'm not here to shame anyone, she added quietly, but I won't ignore what's plain to see. Her eyes scanned the room. She didn't stop on any face too long. She didn't have to. This department has been through enough headlines, enough excuses, enough closed-door conversations, she said. The time for whispers is over. Kyle Mason dropped his gaze to the table. Beside him, another officer, older and weary-looking, nodded slowly. Naomi turned off the projector. "I believe in second chances," she said, "but only when we take responsibility for the first one." Then she stepped away from the screen, folded her hands behind her back, and waited. Not for applause, not for permission, but for them to feel the shift. And somewhere deep inside that quiet room, something did shift. Not loud, but real. By the time Naomi Wallace left the precinct that night, the sun had already dipped low behind the hills of Brookfield, casting long golden fingers across the quiet streets. The department building stood eerily still under the soft flicker of its aging lampposts, and the last remnants of twilight painted the parking lot in shades of blue and gray. She didn't leave through the front. She never did. Instead, Naomi exited through the side corridor, an old military habit of avoiding spectacle. Her steps were measured, her posture as composed as it had been that morning. The uniform now hung in her back seat, replaced by a charcoal overcoat and a dark scarf that shielded her neck from the gathering chill. She carried no briefcase, just the same small satchel slung over one shoulder, the same one she'd worn that morning when 3 of her own officers had mistaken her for a trespasser. As she approached her car, something pulled at the edge of her instincts, a small flicker of awareness just behind the ears. She paused briefly, scanning the far end of the lot. One other vehicle idled across the street, headlights off, parked near the edge of an old tire shop that had closed years ago. Tinted windows, no license plate. Naomi didn't react. She got in her vehicle without haste, started the engine, and pulled out slowly, her eyes on the rearview mirror, calm but alert. The car didn't follow immediately. It waited, counted to 5, then rolled out from the shadows and eased onto the road behind her. She didn't speed up. She took the long route home, looping through back streets, past closed gas stations and shuttered storefronts, making turns that didn't lead directly anywhere. The car stayed behind, not close enough to be aggressive, just near enough to be felt. 10 minutes in, she knew with certainty this wasn't coincidence. Brookfield was a small town, no traffic, no tourists, no one tailed someone through 3 unnecessary turns at 8:47 p.m. unless they had a reason. And whoever was in that car thought they had one. She took a final left onto her street, an oak-lined neighborhood at the edge of town where porches creaked and wind chimes hummed low. The car turned too. Naomi pulled into her driveway as calmly as ever. She didn't go inside immediately. She simply turned off the engine and sat there in the quiet, hand resting on the steering wheel. The shadowed car coasted past her home. No lights, no sound, just a slow crawl like it was dragging its teeth along the curb. Then it was gone. Or so it thought. Naomi didn't move. Inside her home, 3 motion-triggered cameras had already activated, and above her garage, a 4th, an unmarked thermal 360-degree camera, tracked the vehicle's heat signature as it passed. Naomi had installed it herself, wired into a private encrypted server after spending 20 years in federal security work. She didn't trust government systems, and certainly not small-town ones. At 9:01 p.m., she entered the house and locked the door behind her. At 9:07, a crash shattered the quiet, glass exploding from the front living room window. Naomi didn't flinch. She was already crouched beside the fireplace, one hand on the emergency keypad and the other on the pepper gray Glock she hadn't drawn in nearly 4 years. She waited, silent, listening. Nothing more came. She stood slowly, scanned the entry, and approached the broken window with measured steps. A jagged rock now lay among the glass shards. Wrapped around it was a crumpled piece of lined notebook paper, written in red ink, slanted, hurried, angry. "Get out of Brookfield. We don't take orders from a black bee hiding behind a badge." Naomi read it once, folded it, and then placed it carefully into a plastic evidence sleeve from her satchel. She wasn't shocked. She was expecting worse. Without a word, she moved to her study, opened the encrypted drive, and pulled up the feed from her exterior cams. It took exactly 45 seconds to identify the vehicle's make and model, an early 2000s black Chevy Impala with a mismatched front panel and one cracked taillight. Zooming into frame 047, she isolated a glimpse of the fake license plate, just enough to catch that it had no state seal, no registration barcode. A prop, a decoy. The type used by off-the-books vigilantes, or worse, insiders with access. Naomi clicked the export button, saved the video clip, then added it to an external USB drive marked with a simple label, Brookfield Threat 0921 p.m. She didn't call the local police. She didn't notify the press. She logged into her secure Justice Department portal, the one used for high-level witness protection and internal corruption flags, and uploaded the footage, tagging it for immediate review under Title IX intimidation protocols. Within moments, an alert was routed to a regional federal office. Then she sat back in her chair and breathed, once, deep and even. Naomi knew exactly what this was. This wasn't just about her title or her skin color. This was about control. Who had it, who kept it, and who was willing to burn the house down to avoid giving it up. She turned off the lights in her office and stood at the window, looking out at the cracked glass on her lawn, the wind rustling the broken curtain. And she whispered, not to anyone in particular, "You don't scare me. You just told me I'm getting close." Across the street, porch lights were still dark. No one had come out. That was Brookfield's other sickness, the silence. A culture of closed doors and looked away eyes. But Naomi didn't need backup. She needed truth, and tonight truth had crept out of its hiding place, just long enough to toss a rock through her window. Now she knew what she was dealing with. And for the first time since her appointment, she allowed herself a small smile. Not of joy, not of victory, but of certainty. Because now it was official. This wasn't personal. It was systemic. And she was done knocking politely. The next morning, the break room at Brookfield PD was colder than usual. Not from the air conditioning, but from something else lingering in the air. A heaviness, the kind that follows exposure. A pot of burnt coffee simmered on its last breath, untouched. Sergeant Cole Barnes paced the corner like a wolf stuck in a cage too small. His uniform looked as crisp as ever, but there was a twitch in his jaw that hadn't been there yesterday. He slammed his locker shut with a sharp echo that bounced down the corridor. "I don't care what the press says," he barked, voice low but laced with venom. "You put someone like her in charge to check a diversity box, and now suddenly I'm supposed to salute like she earned it?" Across the room, Officer Lisa Drew sat with both hands wrapped tightly around a coffee cup she wasn't drinking. Her fingers trembled ever so slightly. Her face looked pale, worn. Her eyes avoided his. "She's not command," Barnes continued. "She's a photo op in a uniform, that's all." In the corner near the vending machine, Officer Kyle Mason stood silently, one foot resting against the wall, arms folded, face unreadable. He didn't speak. He didn't move. But inside his jacket pocket, his right thumb pressed a small black button, flat, discreet, and hidden along the edge of a silver clip-on voice recorder. It was originally issued for note-taking during patrol. Tonight, it was capturing something very different. Barnes kept going. He wasn't trying to convince anyone. He was performing for himself. "You watch," he said, gesturing to no one in particular. "One of these days, she's going to screw up, and they'll realize what a joke this appointment was. Mark my words, Brookfield's gone to hell." Lisa let out a shallow breath. "Cole, maybe don't say this here." "Why not?" he snapped. "What, you scared she's got bugs in the ceiling now? You scared we can't even vent in our own break room?" Lisa looked away, eyes dark with something between guilt and fear. She didn't respond, but Kyle noticed. Every word felt heavier now, more dangerous. Barnes dropped his voice, made it more personal. "She's not even from here," he said. "She doesn't know how we work. And honestly, she doesn't belong here, not in this department, not in this town. She's got no history with us, just some polished resume and a badge she didn't earn." Kyle's eyes didn't move, but his chest tightened. He remembered that morning in the parking lot, how she had stood still, dignified, while they all tried to shrink her. He remembered the way she never raised her voice, how she walked into that conference room and made the whole building go still with nothing more than the truth on a screen. He'd said nothing that morning, but he was listening now. And this time he was recording. Later that evening, long after the halls had emptied and the chatter had faded, Kyle sat alone in the squad car parked near the east entrance. The lights were off. His laptop was open. The recording played softly in his earbuds. Every syllable, every slur, every note of disdain in Barnes's voice echoing like poison through the static. He didn't know what would happen if he turned it in. But he knew what would happen if he didn't. And somewhere deep inside he realized silence may protect comfort, but it destroys character. At 11:42 p.m., Officer Kyle Mason uploaded the audio file to a secure external drive, typed out a signed statement detailing what he had witnessed, and emailed it to the State Inspector General's office. Subject line, misconduct, internal hostility and racial bias, Brookfield PD. He didn't include excuses. He didn't ask for anonymity. He signed it plainly. Respectfully, Officer Kyle Mason. Then he sat back in the driver's seat, staring into the rearview mirror. And for the first time in weeks, he didn't look away. The Brookfield precinct had quieted into its usual late-night hum, keyboards tapping, phones on silent, the occasional shuffle of paperwork from overworked sergeants. But Naomi Wallace's office felt like a different world, a colder one. She sat at her desk with a single file folder open before her. It was yellowed at the edges, marked with 2 red stamps across the front. Sealed, internal use only. Do not distribute, closed. Except it was never supposed to be closed. She had stumbled on it 3 days into her internal audit, buried in a mislabeled box marked archival, administrative clearance. Most of the documents inside were routine, old citations, attendance logs, retired pensions. But tucked between them was this. Her hands trembled just slightly as she turned the next page. Incident report, October 16, 2002. Victim, Jamal Evans, age 7. Unarmed, shot in the back during a foot pursuit. Officer involved, Mark Delaney. Race, white. Recommendation, administrative leave pending further review. Except the review never happened. Naomi flipped to the next sheet. Complaint filed by Officer Rena Wallace. Her sister. She closed her eyes for a moment. Rena had only ever mentioned that name once. The pain was still fresh, even now, decades later. Naomi remembered coming home on leave from her army deployment and finding Rena sitting on their mother's porch, silent, broken. When Naomi had asked what happened, Rena just said, "I told the truth. And they told me I didn't belong." Naomi had pressed. Rena had refused to explain. Now she understood why. The file showed it all. Rena had filed a formal complaint against Officer Delaney, citing excessive force, failure to follow pursuit protocol, and racial bias. She had even submitted a witness statement from a nearby store owner. And then just 1 week later, disciplinary action against Rena. Violation, failure to follow chain of command. Penalty, termination, no eligibility for reinstatement. The same officer she reported was promoted 6 months later. Commendation, maintain discipline in a high-risk encounter. Naomi sat back in her chair and stared at the wall. This wasn't just about a cover-up. This was a family scar, hidden not just by paperwork, but by shame. Her sister had tried to do what was right, and the department had made an example of her to ensure no one else tried again. Until now, she didn't cry. Naomi never cried. Not when bullets flew past her in Kandahar. Not when she testified before Congress. Not even when she buried Rena 3 years ago. But this settled in her chest like stone. The next morning, a closed-door meeting was called at the precinct. Present were the State Inspector General, 2 attorneys from the Department of Justice, and several internal affairs officers. The room was small, no press, no cameras. Naomi stood at the head of the table. She didn't bring a slideshow. She didn't bring accusations. Just the folder. She placed it on the table, opened it, and turned it toward the others. This file was sealed improperly, she said quietly. It contains the account of a young man who died, a sister who tried to speak up, and a system that punished her for telling the truth. Inspector General Lisa Brenner glanced through the top pages, her brow furrowing. "This was never sent to us," she said. "There's no digital record of any of this." "That's the point," Naomi replied. "It was never meant to see daylight." She let that settle in the room. "I didn't come here to bury the past," she continued, Her voice was calm but firm. I came to excavate it, because what we don't confront, we repeat. And I'm done watching silence do more damage than any gun ever could. No one spoke for a moment. Then Lisa nodded, slowly, gravely. We'll open a formal inquiry, she said, and we'll start with Officer Delaney's personnel record. Naomi didn't smile. She didn't relax. This wasn't a victory. This was the reckoning her sister never lived to see. Before the meeting ended, she added one last thing, not to accuse, but to remind. Justice delayed is not justice denied, unless we stop searching. And I won't stop. Not for them, not for me. But for every officer who thought truth would destroy them, instead of set them free. She left the room in silence. But this time it wasn't the kind of silence that buries things. It was the kind that prepares the ground for something to finally grow. The hearing was held in the precinct's old training room, its walls lined with faded posters on procedural conduct and community trust. Irony thickened the air. A folding table had been set up at the front, where Inspector General Lisa Brenner, flanked by 2 attorneys from the State Disciplinary Board, prepared their notes. The door remained open, though no one dared to whisper. Not today. Cole Barnes entered 10 minutes late. He didn't apologize. Still in uniform, boots polished, collar stiff, he carried himself like a man stepping into battle, not consequence. His shoulders were squared, but his eyes darted toward every face in the room as if weighing who still stood with him, and who had already stepped back. Naomi Wallace stood by the far wall, not seated, not flanked by legal counsel, not postured for drama. She was simply there, steady, silent, present. Lisa tapped her pen once and spoke. Sergeant Barnes, this hearing is being recorded and entered into the official disciplinary file of the Brookfield Police Department. You've been called to answer for alleged conduct unbecoming of your rank, including racial bias, insubordination, and public disparagement of command. Do you understand the nature of these proceedings? Barnes crossed his arms. I understand you're throwing me under the bus. Lisa didn't react. She turned to Officer Kyle Mason, who stood at attention near the sidewall, pale but resolved. Kyle nodded once, then without flourish he walked to the small recorder placed on the center of the table and pressed play. The room filled with Barnes' voice, coarse, confident, and unmistakable. You put someone like her in charge to check a diversity box. She's not command, she's a photo op in a uniform. She doesn't belong here, not in this department, not in this town. The air changed, it thickened, not with anger, with truth. And truth, when finally given space, becomes undeniable. Naomi didn't move, didn't blink. Another clip followed, this one from the precinct's own surveillance cameras, recorded the morning she arrived. No audio, just the image of Barnes confronting her. Hand near his holster, posture threatening, tone visibly aggressive. Beside him, Officer Lisa Drew turned her face away from the screen. The blood had drained from her cheeks. When the video ended, Lisa Brenner folded her hands. Sergeant Barnes, would you like to respond? He scoffed. I've got nothing to say to this kangaroo court. Lisa nodded slightly. That's your right. However, the evidence presented, audio and visual, confirms behavior in direct violation of departmental ethics and state conduct codes. She turned toward Naomi. Commander Wallace, do you have anything you'd like to say before we proceed? Naomi stepped forward, her voice clear but even. I don't need to defend my rank, she said quietly, and I'm not here to trade insults. She looked directly at Barnes, not with malice, with finality. You think I was handed this position because of my skin? You're wrong. I earned it in places you've never had to go. And while you were clinging to rank, I was walking through fire. I didn't get promoted to look good. I stood up and kept standing until someone finally noticed. Her eyes never left his. You say you won't bow your head to someone like me. She leaned forward, calm as ever. That's fine, you won't need to, because you've already dug your own grave, and all I had to do was let you speak. A hush rippled through the room. A cavalry room, not from fear, but respect. Barnes bristled, his hands clenched. This is political, he snapped. You all want a headline. You're just making me the fall guy. Lisa Brenner opened a folder. 3 past complaints of excessive force, 2 internal warnings for unprofessional conduct, and a letter of reprimand filed 5 years ago for racially charged remarks that were unable to be corroborated at the time. "This isn't about one mistake," she said flatly. "It's about a pattern, and that pattern ends today." She stood. "Sergeant Barnes, you are hereby stripped of your badge and your sidearm, effective immediately. Your certification as a law enforcement officer in the state of Georgia is suspended pending formal review. You are also under investigation for possible civil rights violations, and your file will be turned over to the Attorney General's office." She extended her hand. "Badge and weapon, now." Barnes didn't move. For a long moment, he stared at Naomi, something dark and bitter pooling in his eyes. Then, with a muttered curse, he tore the badge from his chest, slammed it onto the table, and dropped his service pistol beside it with a violent clatter. He turned without another word, shoulders stiff, and stormed out. The echo of the door slamming behind him felt like a gust of wind had blown through the room. No one spoke. Not yet. Naomi stared at the badge on the table. It was scuffed, dented from the force with which he had thrown it down. But in that dent, there was something more than defeat. There was history. A system that had protected him for years had finally let go. She took a breath, not of relief, but of clarity. Lisa looked at her. "It's not over," she said softly. Naomi nodded. "No," she replied, "it's just begun." That night, long after the echoes of Cole Barnes's departure had faded and the precinct lights had dimmed, Naomi Wallace sat alone in her office. The silence wasn't empty. It was weighted like a thick blanket soaked in memory. Outside, a low wind rustled through the flag by the entrance. Inside, the only sound was the quiet tick of the antique wall clock above the bookshelf. Each second a small reminder that time keeps moving, even when hearts don't. She reached into the bottom drawer of her desk and pulled out a small oak box. The edges were worn smooth from years of handling, the brass latch tarnished but still firm. She placed it on the desk with reverence, like it was sacred. She opened it slowly. Inside lay a faded police badge, not her own but her sister's. Rena Wallace, Brookfield's first black female patrol officer. The badge was scratched, the numbers nearly worn smooth. Naomi ran her thumb across it gently, as if remembering its weight. Beneath the badge was a folded letter. Yellowed at the edges, the handwriting precise, controlled. Naomi unfolded it with care. She had read it only once, the day Rena died, but tonight it was time to read it again. The ink had not faded. "Naomi, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it through the storm I saw coming. Maybe I could have held on longer. Maybe I should have. But the truth is, this place takes pieces of you when you try to change it. And I gave it all I had." Naomi's hands didn't tremble, but her chest tightened. "They said I broke the chain of command, that I betrayed the uniform. But what they meant was I told the truth when it wasn't convenient. I said a boy didn't deserve to die, and for that, they stripped me of everything I'd worked for." She paused, eyes closed, breathing deep against the weight of memory. Rena had never let bitterness win. She had walked out of that station with her head held high, even when no one had stood beside her. "I never got to finish what I started, but maybe you will. If you still believe in integrity, real integrity, not the kind they print on posters, then do what I couldn't. Make silence something else, not just survival. Make it a weapon, a shield, a spotlight. Make it burn through everything they tried to bury." Naomi pressed the letter to her chest. She didn't cry. She had no tears left for the past. But she felt it, the clarity, the calling. Not as a position, not as a duty, but as a promise she had carried in her bones for over 20 years. Her sister hadn't died of heartbreak or pressure. She had died of betrayal by a system that labeled truth as weakness and courage as insubordination. Naomi closed the box gently and placed it back in the drawer, her fingers lingering on the lid before letting go. Then she turned back to her window. The night outside was quiet, but something had shifted in the stillness. The department was watching her now. So was the town. So was every officer who once stayed silent, wondering if it would ever be safe to speak. And now they had an answer. She wasn't done. She hadn't come this far to manage a building. She came to redeem the ground her sister was buried under. And tomorrow, the real work would begin. The morning sun broke across the front steps of the Brookfield Police Department, casting long, warm streaks of gold against the brick facade. The shadows of the past were still there, lingering in corners and behind closed office doors, but the air felt different now, lighter but watchful. Inside, Commander Naomi Wallace stood at the front of the briefing room, flanked by Officer Ethan Rivera on her right and Angela Lopez on her left. The department had been gathered, not for reprimand, not for a press release, but for something that hadn't happened here in years: recognition. She looked out at the crowd. Some faces were open, hopeful. Others remained guarded, skeptical. It didn't matter. What mattered was that they were all there. No one dared skip this one. "Thank you for being here," Naomi began, her voice firm but warm. "We've been through a lot in these past few weeks. We've seen what happens when silence is mistaken for safety, and what happens when truth finally finds a voice." A quiet rustle passed through the room. She continued, "What we build from this moment will define this department long after any of us are gone. That's why today we start something new. Something that doesn't begin with tactics or weapons training, but with character." From the side table, Ethan lifted a small velvet-lined box and placed it in Naomi's hand. Naomi turned toward the room. "This department is launching a new internal initiative. We're calling it Ethics First, a full retraining from the badge up. It will challenge assumptions, rewrite protocols, and confront habits that have been left unchecked for far too long." She paused, then looked to the back of the room. "Leading this effort with me is an officer who chose courage over comfort, a man who once stood in silence, but then found his voice, and with it, reminded this department what integrity looks like." She motioned for him to step forward. Officer Kyle Mason, dressed neatly in his standard patrol uniform, walked slowly toward the front. His face was calm but taut with emotion. Not pride, something deeper. Responsibility. Naomi held up the medal. "For moral courage in a moment that demanded silence," she said. "Officer Mason reminded all of us that redemption is not found in erasing our mistakes, but in choosing to face them." She pinned the small bronze emblem, a shield etched with the words "moral fortitude," to the left breast of his uniform. The room was still. Then came the applause. It wasn't thunderous, it wasn't rehearsed, but it was real. Steady, respectful, earned. Even those who had mocked him just weeks earlier found themselves clapping, some reluctantly, others with quiet reverence. Naomi didn't need to look around to know something was shifting. Not fast, not perfect, but real. After the ceremony, officers lingered in the hallway longer than usual. There were more nods exchanged, more eye contact, less pretending. Still, not everyone was ready. In the back of the room, a few stood with crossed arms and hard eyes. Some still called this a political stunt, a headline play, and maybe for them, it always would be. But Naomi had never been concerned with winning everyone. She was concerned with changing enough. Later that afternoon, maintenance crews gathered outside the precinct's main entrance. They had been tasked with replacing the old brass plaque above the doors, a plaque that once read, "Service through Strength." In its place, Naomi had requested something simpler, something truer. By evening, the new plaque gleamed softly in the fading sun. It bore no names, no rank, just a single sentence carved clean into the metal. "Rank doesn't protect you, character does." Naomi stood alone on the sidewalk, hands folded in front of her, looking up at the words. She didn't smile. She didn't pose for photos. She simply stood, watching. Across the street, Angela Lopez joined her. She glanced up at the new plaque, then at Naomi. "They're not all with us yet," she said quietly. Naomi nodded. "They don't have to be, not all at once." Angela studied her for a moment. "You're still carrying a lot of weight." "I'm not here to lighten it," Naomi replied. "I'm here to make sure it lands in the right hands." Behind them, the sound of officers laughing, a soft, cautious sound, drifted through the doors. Angela looked back one more time. "You think the ones who are still watching from the shadows will come around?" Naomi kept her gaze on the plaque. "Some will," she said. "Some won't, but those who do, they'll help rebuild this place from the inside out." She turned and walked up the steps, her footsteps steady and measured. Because this wasn't the end of a scandal. It was the start of a standard. And for the first time in years, the foundation felt like something worth standing on. As Naomi stepped back inside the precinct beneath the words etched above its door, "Rank doesn't protect you, character does." There was no dramatic music, no fireworks, just the quiet knowing that something had shifted, not only in her department, but in the hearts of those who had finally chosen to see. And perhaps that's the deeper truth this story leaves us with. That change doesn't always come from shouting. Sometimes it comes from standing still, calm, unshaken, and unwilling to look away when it matters most. Naomi didn't lead through fear or force. She led through dignity, through restraint, and through a relentless commitment to integrity, even when the system tried to break her. She honored the memory of her sister, not with revenge, but with reform. And in doing so, she reminded all of us that justice doesn't start with a badge. It starts with a choice. For those of us who have lived long enough to see history repeat itself, this story may feel familiar. Many of you watching it have stood in rooms where the truth was unwelcome. You've watched voices be silenced. Maybe you've been silenced yourself. But Naomi's journey reminds us, we are never too old, too tired, or too outnumbered to do what's right. Whether you're in a uniform or sitting at your kitchen table with a cup of coffee, your conscience still matters. Your courage, quiet as it may be, can still change the world around you. And when we choose to speak, even after years of silence, we don't just protect ourselves, we protect the future. So if this story moved you, if it reminded you of something you once believed in, or someone you once stood up for, I invite you to stay with us. Because here on this channel, we don't just tell stories for entertainment. We tell stories that reflect our shared truths, that honor those who came before us, and that inspire those still searching for the strength to speak up. If this story touched you in any way, I kindly ask, give this video a like to let us know it resonated. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful, meaningful stories like this one. And don't forget to tap the notification bell so you never miss what comes next. Because at Justice Stories, we believe the fight for truth doesn't end when the noise fades. Sometimes it's just beginning, and it starts with someone like you choosing to listen, to remember, and to carry the light forward. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next story.